Thank you, Greg. All right, good to see you tonight. Thank you for coming out to be with us, and appreciate those who have joined us online this evening. I want to welcome them. I was just thinking, as Greg was announcing about next Wednesday night, the ice cream social. I'm responsible for that too, and so I'm curious to see what I'm going to get praised for more, the message tonight or the ice cream next week. We'll find out. But if you want to be turning to Genesis 14, that's where we're going to be tonight. Genesis 14. Cleaning up Lot's mess. I want to ask you a question to start with tonight, and then you can raise your hand or not. It's fine. How many of you would say you're a fan of professional wrestling? How do you like wrestling? Jacob, and later on in Genesis, wrestles the Lord, but that's not what we're talking about tonight. But I'm not really a fan. I guess there was maybe a time when I was a kid, I was into it a little bit, had some other friends that liked it, so I got into it some. I'm not a huge pro wrestling fan by any means. I will say this, I do enjoy a good documentary. My wife knows that, and I don't know if you have these kind of unusual things that you just enjoy watching, but she and I together will sit down and watch wrestling documentaries, about these famous wrestlers and their lives and the things that they've gone through. I don't know why, just find them interesting to learn about their lives and their experiences. And I've seen several in different kind of formats and different networks and stuff like that. And there are different things, three things in particular that all these guys, and then they'll interview these guys when they're older, retired now, and just going on with the rest of their life. And I'm struck by three things that they just about all, no matter their background, their upbringing, three things that really they all kind of have in common. The first thing is that they worked to get where they were. It's not like they just built up, went to the gym and got big and strong, and somebody came along and said, hey, you'd make a good wrestler. We got a job for you. These guys, like any other profession, you want to call it sports or whatever, they had a desire at some point. It's something, the bug kind of got them, and they wanted to be a pro wrestler. And so they would go to these gyms or to these academies, something like that. They would train to do this. You don't just get in the ring and start throwing people around. I mean, you'd kill somebody if you did that. But they don't do that. They train with kind of the techniques and the things like that. Then when they leave there, they go and they have to, they don't go to the big times yet. Some of you may have seen or grew up watching this. They go to these kind of smaller little regional associations, and they'll wrestle there, and they start to develop kind of their persona, the character they're going to be. None of them just have normal names. They're all crazy, wild characters by the time they make it big. And so that's where they kind of develop that, kind of hone their skills and all that. And so whatever you think of it, they are the best in the world at what they do, and they've trained for it. None of us could just go out and do all those things that they do. The second thing that, again, to a man, they all kind of have in common, these older retired guys, they beat their bodies up. You see them after their careers are over, and they can barely walk. I mean, they can barely get out of bed. And I remember, I think it was Ric Flair. I mean, everybody knows who he is. I think I heard him say years ago, he said, listen, wrestling is choreographed, but it's not fake. And what he meant by that was, yeah, it may be scripted. We may know who's going to win. They get in there kind of grabbing each other, and they're maybe telling each other, okay, here's the next move we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do for a good show and all this. They may know the outcome, but you can't fake picking somebody up and throwing them down on the mat. You can't fake jumping over a rope and then landing on somebody and all those wild things they do. And they beat their bodies to death. And it's not like other things, baseball, football, sports like that. You get injured, somebody's there to say, listen, you need to sit out a few weeks. You can't, you need to rest before you get back out there. These guys, if they don't perform, they don't get paid. They get fired. And so they'll kind of juice them up to get back out there. And then when they get done with that match, they can't even bend over to unlace their shoes. But you'll see these guys still relatively young, 40, 50 years old, and they walk around like they're 80, 90 years old. I mean, they have just destroyed their bodies. And like I said, every single one of them, it seems like, that they had to go through this, this training, that they've destroyed their bodies. The last thing, though, and this is kind of where I'm heading with the message tonight, the saddest thing, that again, it seems like the overwhelming majority have this kind of testimony or experience. As they were coming up, when they were still a nobody, so to speak, they'd find a woman, they'd get married, fall in love, get married, start a family. Once they made it big, once they started going on the road, and then, they don't just wrestle in one town. They may be in Raleigh tonight, but they're in Richmond the next night, and Columbus and Indiana. They're going all over the world, all over the country. These guys are on the road 250, 300 times a year. And without fail, most of these guys, as they got older, as they retired, one of the things that they had to talk about in their life was their family. They failed their families. Just about every one of them. The wife that was with them when they started, they're not married to them anymore. The kids that they had with that first wife, they're not really close to them. You know, they'll interview the kids, and the kids will say, all my friends would say, oh, it's so cool, your dad's so-and-so. And the kids would say, well, you see him more than I do. He's never home. You know, they would lose those families because they were pursuing that fame and that success that came with all that. And it seems like so many of them late in their careers, they find another wife, they get married, they have this young family coming up, and they all say, like it's to be commended. They all say, oh, I'm doing a much better job now. I learned a lot of lessons on that first one, and I'm there for my kids now. I'm there for my wife. You know, they'll say, I'm trying to reconcile with my older kids that didn't grow up with me. I'm doing what I can. But it's unreal how many of them sacrifice their families for that fame, to stand in the middle of that ring and to have people praise them that they'll never know. But to have these people praise them and the adulation that they would get from doing that, they were willing to sacrifice their families. Now, what does that have to do with tonight? The person that is kind of, I don't know, he's the key character tonight, but he's the reason we're talking about this story tonight is Lot. And that's exactly what Lot did. Lot looked at Sodom, he saw the opportunities there, and he was willing to sacrifice his family to get that. As a matter of fact, last week, Pastor Chris talked about in Genesis 13. Well, I want to start there to give us a little context. But you remember last week what we talked about. Abram and Lot, they're successful, that they have these large, have all this livestock and all this stuff, and they're both very successful. Here's Abram, and here's his nephew Lot, probably more like a son to him. And they're getting so wealthy, they have so much livestock, so much material possessions. Chapter 13 tells us that their servants are starting to fight. They're starting to disagree because there's not enough pasture land for all their animals. And so Abram, and I may go back and forth, I think I told you, at this point in Genesis, he's still Abram. His name has not been changed to Abraham yet, but I may use the names interchangeably. That's fine. But Abram says to Lot, he says, listen, we're family. He says, this doesn't need to become an issue. He said, so we're just going to separate. We're going to pick areas where we can take our animals, our livestock, and we'll just kind of separate for our good, for the good of our servants, for everybody. And you remember, Chris said last week, he said, now, Abram as the patriarch, as kind of the father figure, he had every right, legally, every other way, to say, listen, Lot, I'm going to take the land I want, and you go take the other land. But is that what Abram did? No. He said to Lot, you pick what you want. You pick the land you want, and I'll go the opposite direction. And so in chapter 13, again, we're in 14 tonight, but for the context, go to chapter 13 with me and look at what it says Lot did when Abram made that offer to him. Lot raised his eyes and saw all the vicinity of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, that it was before the Lord, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was like the garden of the Lord, you see what it says, like the land of Egypt going towards Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the vicinity of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. So they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the vicinity of the Jordan. And take note of this emphasized part. He moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked sinners against the Lord. So what is Lot doing? He sees this land, it's attractive to him, he wants to go there, but the Scripture's already telling us it's laying the groundwork for what we know takes place over the next few chapters, for just how wicked, just how rebellious Sodom is. And what are we told? Lot is right there in the middle of it. He wanted that. Here's a man that's going to be willing to sacrifice his reputation, his children, his family's spiritual lives. Ultimately, his wife loses her life over this. His children debase themselves, debase him, because he was attracted to Sodom, because he saw that and he wanted that. Like those wrestlers that sacrificed their family for the praise and the adulation of the fans. We see that Lot is willing to sacrifice his family to get the things that he wants. Now, as you come to chapter 14, we're going to read the whole, hadn't done this yet, but we're going to read the whole chapter tonight. Just kind of go through it and draw some points out of it. But begin with me in chapter 14. 13 has set it up for us. Lot has moved towards Sodom. So now what happens? It came about in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these kings came as allies to the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea, or the Dead Sea. For 12 years, these 5 cities, they had served Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth-Karnaim, and the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim in Sheva Kiriathaim. I don't know why I'm reading all these names. And the Horites on their Mount Seir as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and conquered all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites who lived in Hazon Tamar. And the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, came out and they lined up for battle against them in the valley of Siddim, against Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goyim, Amphraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. And then we come to this in verses 10 through 12. Now, in the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell into them. Just a little side note, that little statement there that's given, that probably gives us a little insight into Sodom and Gomorrah. Maybe this is why Lot was interested. Those tar pits, what we're told maybe a substance known as bitumen, kind of like a sealant or an asphalt or something like that. This might be the substance that Noah would have used to seal the ark. And so it would have been a desired item, and they had the market on it. People would come and pay them for it. So that may give us some insight into why Lot wanted to live near this area, so some of the success and the wealth that they may have had. But we see these kings, as they're fleeing, they fall into some of those pits, these natural tar pits that are there in the region. But those who survived fled to the hill country. Then they took all the possessions. These are the 5 kings who've come up, or the 4 kings rather. They took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed. And then verse 12. This is kind of the key of the whole chapter. This is why the chapter is in the Bible. It says, they also took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions and departed, for he was living in Sodom. If that statement wasn't in there, if Lot wasn't there, there'd probably be no reason for us to know about this 4,000 years after the fact. But they kidnapped Lot, Abram's nephew, and that's going to be the reason that we see, read about this account tonight. Now, first of all, again, we're still very early in the book of Genesis, so there are a lot of firsts that are still being pointed out in the book. This is the very first reference to a war in the Bible. Doesn't mean it was the first war in biblical times, but this is the first time the Bible references a war. These 4 kings came up against these 5 kings. The 5 kings are these 5 cities in this valley. Sodom, Gomorrah, their neighbors in those cities. In Deuteronomy 29, it's recorded that not only Sodom and Gomorrah, but 2 of the other cities were destroyed. A little bit later here in chapter 19, when God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, He destroys all the cities of the valley. So He destroys 2 others as well. There's one, though, that is spared. If you remember the story in Genesis 19, remember as the angels are telling Lot, as the destruction's about to happen, they tell Lot, you've got to get out of this valley, get up to the mountains. And Lot says to them, he pleads with them, says, I don't think we can make it to the mountains. He says, can we make it to this 5th city? Can we make it to Bela, to Zoar? And there would we be safe. And so the angels say, okay, if you'll go there, we won't destroy that city. So Zoar was scheduled to be destroyed that night with Sodom and Gomorrah. It was only spared because Lot requested that he be able to go there to hide out. But Deuteronomy tells us the other 4 cities that are mentioned here, they're all wiped out. Now, why were they attacked here in chapter 14? What's probably taken place for several years, we're told they had been giving a tribute to Kedorlaomer, this king of Elam, for protection. And they finally decided they weren't going to do that anymore. When nations did that, or city-states, it's probably because they thought they were big enough to take care of themselves. They knew we're probably going to have a battle now. That king's going to come. He's going to want that money. So we're probably going to have to be able to defend ourselves. So these cities knew what was coming, but they thought they were prepared for it. They could fight this king off who wanted to collect this money from them. And so it would lead to this war. Now we're told that the 4 kings on their way to this valley to face these 5 kings, they stopped off at other city-states. They conquered them. They plundered them. Might as well get some extra treasure in the process. Then in 5 through 7, we see that they come and they fight these 5 cities, these 5 kings in the valley of Siddim, and they defeat them. They conquer the 5 cities, and they take the people, they take the possessions with them, and start heading back toward their homeland. But again, as verse 12 says, there was a very famous resident that they had taken, at least somebody that was important to Abram. Lot, who was a resident of Sodom, he was kidnapped. He was taken by these 4 kings as they started their journey back away. So what do we draw from these first 12 verses tonight? What lesson, what application can you and I take from what it says here? Because it's mostly about a war, but then it sums it up with the fact that Lot was there. Excuse me. I think the first lesson we can draw tonight is this. You and I, what Lot teaches us is this. Be careful what you wish for. Be careful for the things that you desire and you wish for. Again, what has Lot done? He saw the land. He knew it was near Sodom. Lot probably knew what was going on in Sodom. One writer I looked at said Lot may have even thought, I can go there and I may witness to them. I may be able to turn them to the one true God. But that's not what happened, is it? Lot went toward this wicked area, this wicked city, and because he wanted the opportunities there, the wealth, the affluence that would come from living there, he also had to deal with the bad. And you and I know what that's like, don't we? You live anywhere in our country, there are advantages and disadvantages to just about anywhere. I like where we live. I like this part of the country. There are some things that aren't ideal. It can get pretty humid here. The gnats are real bad. And here, if the season hadn't already started, it's going to be here very shortly. We never know. We might get a hurricane at some point, and it may be a bad one. That's just one of the things you deal with when you live on the Atlantic coast. Now, I've lived in the middle part of the country. You don't really have to worry about hurricanes there. Tornadoes can come up at any time. The area I lived in, we actually had to worry about earthquakes. The New Madrid fault line goes right there through the middle of the country. And there's probably going to be a day when people don't expect it and a massive earthquake takes place in the middle part of the country. Now, up north, they don't have to worry probably about earthquakes or hurricanes, but it can get bitterly cold, can it? The West Coast, they have earthquakes. They have wildfires, things like that. Every part of the country has advantages, but there are also disadvantages. And if you choose to live there, most of the time might be good, but there's going to be some bad. And that's what Lot kind of teaches us here. He wants the advantages of being where Sodom is and what they have to provide, but there are some negatives. And we see it play out here. He gets caught in the middle of this, and he gets kidnapped, and he gets taken away. And it's an important lesson for us about sin, isn't it? You and I, if we want to dabble in sin, people don't get into sin because it looks bad. They don't get into it because they think they're going to be miserable. They get into it because it looks nice. But the Bible kind of teaches us, you want to get involved in that, you go do that, but you're going to have to deal with the consequences. You're going to have to deal with the downside if you want to dabble in those things. In the book of Proverbs, we're reminded of this. There's a way which seems right to a person, but its end is the way of death. And that's true for a lot of folks, isn't it? You and I maybe were going down that road at one point. We've made some mistakes. We've started giving into temptation or giving into sins that we knew were wrong, or we know other people that have done that. We start going down it because it looks good, it looks pleasurable, it looks enjoyable, but the end is going to be destruction. From the outside of the walls of Sodom, everything looked good to Lot. The land looked good, the opportunity. There were probably people going in and out of that city all the time. He was just thinking about all the money he could make. Think about the opportunities for his family if they lived near Sodom. But once you get inside those walls, once you get inside that sin and that wickedness, there are some things that can happen. We know that's ultimately what's going to happen in Lot's life. But he finds himself here because he's a part of this city, he's a part of this battle. And he's captured, he's kidnapped, and he's taken away. And Christians, you and I, we need to heed the words of Jesus in Mark chapter 8. He warns us about this, about the temptations that the world may provide to us and losing sight of what truly matters, the eternal things that matter, our lives, our souls, our families, what truly matters in them. He says in Mark 8, 36 and 37, what does it benefit a person to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what could a person give in exchange for his soul? You could gain everything this world provides, but it's going to be temporary. We're all going to die. We all have an expiration date. And then what? Then we'll have eternity to answer for the decisions we made and the things that we valued. And so Lot teaches us this very important truth here in these first 12 verses. Be careful what you wish for. He got Sodom. He got that city. He got the experiences, the famous friends, the parties, all the things that he could go to and be a part of. But there was a downside to living in Sodom. We see it here in being captured. We know it was only going to get worse, though. But when we choose those things, we've got to deal with the consequences, the good and the bad that may come from them. And so Lot teaches us that, first of all. Be careful what we wish for. Now, as you move on and go on to the next part, we see Abram's response to this. Again, we would not know anything about this except for the fact that Lot is Abram's nephew. And so it draws Abram in, and that's what we see as we move on. Verses 13 and 14 tell us, then a survivor came and told Abram the Hebrew. Now he was residing by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and the brother of Aner. And they were allies with Abram. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he led out his trained men born in his house, numbering 318, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Now, there's two more verses I want to read in this point, but I want to stop right there and just make some observations here, point some things out to you. First of all, again, another first in the Bible. We're only 14 chapters in, but still, I think an interesting first. This is the first time that the word Hebrew is used. Again, that's what it says there, Abram the Hebrew. Where does that term come from? Because we know that's what the Israelites are called, the Hebrew children. It's the language that the Old Testament was written in. Where does this word even come from? Well, we're not sure. It may possibly be in reference to one of Abram's ancestors, a man by the name of Eber. In Genesis 10 and 11, we're told of Eber. He was the grandson, or the great-grandson, rather, of Shem. And if I count this off right, he's the great-grandfather of Abraham. So he's right there in that family line, a descendant of Shem, an ancestor of Abraham. May have been some significance to him at this point in history. And so that may be the reference, that Abram is known as a descendant of Eber. It could also be a reference to Abram's journey. Some say that the term means passed over. And so it may be a reference to kind of the fact Abram was an outsider. He had to pass over the Euphrates River to come to the land of Canaan. And that may be how he was known. If you've ever been a transplant somewhere, people may know you for where you came from. And so that may be what it is. We don't know exactly where the term comes from, but it's the very first time the word Hebrew is found in the Bible. And it's interesting, in the Bible generally, not always, it's non-Israelites who use the term. The Egyptians used it to call the Israelites Hebrews. The Philistines would use it. Other groups, by and large, would use this term to refer to the Israelites, although we do see the Jews use it as well. Now, another thing that's interesting about those first two verses, we're told Abram, he's already formed an alliance with the other men in this area, the other leaders. So they must know the possibility of attacks that can take place. So he's got an alliance with these other leaders, these other individuals in that area. But did you catch that? You see there what it says. When he hears that Lot's been taken, when Abram has to get up and fight, and that's interesting. We don't think of Abram as a soldier, as a general, as someone who would lead out other fighters, but he has to do that, has to be ready to do that, to do that when called upon. But what does it say there at the end? He had 318 trained men ready to go. Think about that. That shows us how powerful, how influential Abram already is. These are trained soldiers. These are not just his servants who are going to stay behind and watch after the flocks. He has 318 men ready to go and fight. Now think about that. On top of that, he's got those other servants. He's got female servants. He wouldn't have trained them to go out and fight, so he still has female servants. He's got the wives of these men. He's got their children. It's not out of the realm of possibility to say well over 1,000 people depended on Abram. They were basically under his employ. They were his servants, or they worked for him. But think about that he had at least probably well over 1,000 people that kind of answered to him, whose very survival depended upon Abram. That shows us just how powerful, how influential, the amount of wealth this man would have had at this time in the world. And so as you keep going, the second part of this passage tells us this in verses 15 and 16. So he's heard that Lot has been taken. He calls up these men to go into fight. He divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants, they defeated them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. He brought back all the possessions and also brought back his relative Lot with his possessions, and also the women and the other people. So he goes off and the fight is successful. Now again, a couple observations about that, and then we'll get to our second point tonight. First of all, recall back 2 chapters earlier. The last time I preached from Genesis, we were in chapter 12. Remember, that's where the Lord promises, makes a covenant with Abram. Makes some promises to him about his future, about all the things he's going to do for him. And you remember one of the things he says in Genesis 12:3, I will curse the one who curses you. I will curse the one who curses you. Abram would have had no issue with this battle, with these 4 kings coming up against these 5 cities. Probably wouldn't have bothered Abram at all, except for the fact that Kedorlaomer took his nephew Lot. Once that happened, once Lot was kidnapped, once his flesh and blood was taken, that became Abram's problem, didn't it? He had to go out now and he had to fight. Like I said, passage may not even be in the Bible, if not for that fact. But Lot was taken, so Abram had to get up and he had to go and fight. One writer put it this way. He said, Kedorlaomer taking Lot, that was tantamount to opposing Abram. It was like, trying to challenge Abram to a fight at this point. And this would ultimately be that ruler's downfall, because he got in the way of Abram. And what was the issue? It was the fact that God promised Abram, anyone messes with you, anyone curses you, they're going to have to answer to me. And so we see that Kedorlaomer paid the price because he took something that was very important to Abram. The other side of that is this. Chapter 12 and verse 3 also tells us that God promises, I will bless you and make your name great. And you go and you see what Abram does in this battle, his total success. I mean, just total domination, going out, being successful in defeating these kings, getting all the captives back and bringing them back in. All of that points to this fact. God blessed Abram. I will make you great. I will make you a great name. As I mentioned earlier, we won't even think of Abram as a soldier, as a general in any way. But the Lord blessed his military efforts. As he went out and he fought, the Lord gave him total and absolute victory. So what's the second lesson that we can take tonight? If the first one's that we need to be very careful what we wish for. That Lot teaches us this. What do we learn from Abram? Well, I think from Abram, it's more along the lines of Abram, he's a type of Christ. And what I mean by that is, he reminds us there's a Redeemer. There is somebody out there to rescue us and to save us, even when we make a mess of our lives, isn't there? Now, Lot had done all this. It was Lot's fault that he found himself in this situation. Abram, from our perspective, a lot of us probably would have said Abram would have been well within his rights to say Lot chose that. He chose that lifestyle. Abram had probably warned him at some point in the time before all this happened. Abram, we all maybe would have said, I'm not going to give my life in that situation. Abram probably would have been totally justified to do this, but he went after the one that he loved and cared about and brought them back, even though Lot was the one who'd made the mistake. That sounds an awful lot like salvation, doesn't it? God is totally within His rights to turn us over into an eternity in hell, isn't He? There's nothing you and I can offer Him. There's nothing that we can say, you owe us this. You should come and you should try to save us. You should try to redeem us. There's nothing that says that. But God chose to do it, didn't He? You and I deserve to spend an eternity separated from Him. But God sent His Son to die on the cross for us. And so that if we would receive that free gift, we can be brought back in. Abram in this story, I think this particular lesson is that he's a type of Christ. He's a picture. He's a reminder. He's looking ahead. As we read this story, it's pointing us to the New Testament. The last point will do that as well. But he's pointing us to this fact that there is a Redeemer who's going to come and will save those who have made a mess of their lives and will take them back if they're willing to come. Galatians chapter 3 shows us this connection between the Old Testament Abraham and the Christ of the New Testament. Galatians 3, Paul writes, if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's descendants, heirs according to the promise. So I don't think I'm overstepping the bounds to say that Abraham is a type of Christ. Jesus is a descendant of him. But what we see Abraham do in the Old Testament, the promise that God gives him, and the things that we see come in Abraham's life, they're ultimately fulfilled by Jesus Christ. And so as we see this story in the Old Testament, of Abram taking up arms to go out and to redeem this one that's been taken, that's been held captive, you and I can look at that and say, that's what Jesus Christ did for me. I made a mess of my life. I made the bad decisions. I'm in the bad shape that I'm in because of what I chose to do. God doesn't owe me anything. But He chose to come and to redeem us, to bring us and to pull us back into that safety. Matter of fact, in the book of Luke, you have a story, one of the first instances of Jesus really getting on some people's nerves. He goes into the synagogue, he gets up in the temple to read, or in the synagogue to read, and he opens up from the book of Isaiah. And this is what it says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. This is where he makes a general proclamation that he's the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy regarding being the Messiah or the Redeemer. He says, because He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives. Isn't that what Lot was? He was a captive at this point. That's what you and I were before salvation. We were captives. We were in bondage to sin. And recovering of the sight of the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed. Jesus Christ says, I'm the fulfillment of all these promises. I've come to deliver the captives, to deliver those who are in bondage. That's exactly where you and I are in sin, isn't it? That's one of the really tough lessons I think we need to learn as Christians. I'm all for righteous indignation. I'm all for when we see wrong, we stand up against it. We say, yes, that's wrong. We as Christians have to oppose sin. We have to oppose evil. And if somebody's doing wrong, we need to point that out. But at the same time, it's very easy for us sometimes to forget it's not the people who are the enemy, it's the devil, isn't it? The people are prisoners. They're in captivity. They need to be delivered. They need to be redeemed. That's what you and I were. We were captives. We were taken hostage. We were captives of Satan, and Jesus came and rescued us. And as we go out with the gospel, we're trying to help them get out of bondage and come back into freedom. It's very easy for us to look at the world and to look at people as the enemy. Satan's the enemy, isn't he? He's the one that keeps people in bondage. He's the one that keeps them in the chains of sin. We're out trying to deliver them and to bring them back. And why can we do that? Because Christ is the Redeemer. Christ saw all of us in chains, saw all of us in that bondage, and He came. Abram is a picture of that here in the book of Genesis, but Jesus Christ is the ultimate Redeemer, isn't He? He went out and rescued those who deserved everything they had, but Jesus brought us back and mercifully redeemed us from that oppression. And so we see this second point tonight, there is a Redeemer. As Abram goes out and rescues his relative, his family member Lot, and brings him back in, it's a picture of what Jesus Christ would do for each and every one of us. So then we come to the final part, and this is, I'll be honest, I don't apologize for what I'm preaching. I guess I shouldn't stand up and say it's tough. This last part really makes this passage tough, to kind of end on especially. Here's what happens when Abram comes back. After his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was priest of the Most High God. And it goes on and says, and he blessed him, this being Melchizedek, he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, professor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has handed over your enemies to you. And he, this being Abram, gave to him, to Melchizedek, a tenth of everything. Then the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give the people to me, and take the possessions for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have sworn to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, I will not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, so that you do not say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing except what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their share. Now, take notice of some observations here. First of all, this, the king of Sodom. Now, we assume this is Bera. This is probably the king that fell in that tar pit earlier. Somehow he must have survived that, got out, and now he's back. And what does he tell Abram? He says, I want the people back. He says, you can keep the wealth that you recovered, all of that. Just give me the people back. Let me have them. That was probably pretty standard for warfare at that time and in the end of a battle. But Abram declined. Abram says, no, I'm not going to take anything from you. I'm not going to take any wealth that you want me to have. He says, now my allies, they can have the money. They can have their share of what we recovered in this battle. But I don't want anything. Now he says to the king, the reason I don't, he says, I wouldn't take so much as a thread from you. I wouldn't take a sandal strap from you because I don't want you to come back and say, you made me rich. Again, we know Abram's very rich. But he says, I don't want you to be able to say, well, I contributed to that. Abram's success, that comes from me. I've been able to do that. He probably doesn't want anyone to think that his blessings came from anyone but God. Abram wants to be able to give all of the credit to God. There may also be another issue at hand here. He doesn't want to feel like he owes Sodom anything. He doesn't want to owe the king of Sodom anything. If he feels like he's taken money, that some of his wealth has come from Sodom, if that city or any of those other cities run into any trouble down the road, he may feel obligated, or they may reach out to him and say, you need to come help us. Now, if you read ahead, you know they do run into some major issues, don't they? And he doesn't have to have any obligation of that. So that may be why he says, I don't want any of this money that we've taken back. He doesn't want to feel he's obligated to help Sodom in any way whatsoever. So he said, I don't want any of this. Give it to my allies, but I don't want any of it. So what do we take from the third point tonight? Again, there's the entrance of a very interesting character. And I just want to conclude tonight by talking about this individual who's mentioned here at the end of the chapter. I'll kind of lay out for you what you know. It's going to be one of those where I'll leave it up to you. You can come to your own conclusion about who we're talking about here. But the third point tonight is this. We've looked at Lot and how we all have to live with the consequences of our actions and our decisions. We've looked at Abram as a type of Christ, a redeemer who went out to save Lot. Lastly, we're introduced to a man by the name of Melchizedek. And this reminds us of something we see throughout the Old Testament, not just Genesis, but the entire Old Testament. The Old, it points to the New. The Old Testament anticipates the things that the New Testament will fulfill. In Isaiah chapter 40, we're told this, the voice of one calling out, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. I believe that passage is used to talk about John the Baptist in the New Testament. He's out preparing the way for the coming Christ. He's pointing people and saying, the Messiah is here. The Messiah is at hand. Well, is that what we have with Melchizedek? Is Melchizedek a type of Christ in the Old Testament? Is he pointing us? Is he an expectation of the coming Messiah?
Look at Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. God, after He spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions and in many ways. Again, what's this third point? The old points to the new. So God, all these years, He's talked to folks about the prophets, and in any other ways, He's let them know about the coming Messiah, about the coming hope. In these last days, the writer of Hebrews says, He's spoken to us in His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, through whom also He made the world. So the writer of Hebrews kind of sums it up for us, doesn't he? The Old Testament told us what to expect. He says we're now under the new covenant, and he said the Messiah has come. What the Old Testament promised, we've now seen fulfilled. At the time the writer of Hebrews penned those words, Jesus had ministered, He died, He's been buried, resurrected, and He's ascended back to heaven. And so the writer is saying the Old Testament pointed us to that and promised us that would come. He says we've seen it happen. In our day, in our time, that has happened. And so that brings us back to this question, who is Melchizedek? Again, Abram comes back here from this battle, and there's two people that meet him. One is a bad influence, Sodom. He doesn't want Bera, the king of Sodom, doesn't even want part of him. But Melchizedek, there's something special about him. And so, like I said, I want to conclude tonight by just giving some thoughts on him. You may be disappointed at the end and say, Joey, come down on one side or the other. I don't know. I'm just going to tell you what we do know. Who is Melchizedek, this one who comes out to meet Abram, to help celebrate this victory that he's had with him? Well, his name, Melchizedek, Melchi and Zedek, it literally means king of righteousness. King of righteousness. That sounds like somebody we know, doesn't it? King of righteousness. We're told that in this passage he's called the king of Salem. That's the original name of a city we know as Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the name literally from Hebrew, means city of peace, Uru Shalom. So he's the king of the city of peace. Jesus Christ is called the Prince of Peace, isn't he? You're starting to put some things together in terms of what one of the views are in who Melchizedek is. We're told that he's a priest of the Most High God. In his language, as he talks to Abram here, he uses terminology of God that only a true believer would use. He calls him El Elyon. That's the name of God. This indicates that whoever this man is, he worships and recognizes the God that Abram does. He shares the belief that God does. He does not worship the false gods or associate with the false gods of the Canaanites. This person, whoever it is, believes like Abram, that Abram's dealing with here at the end of the chapter. We're told that he brings out bread and wine for Abram and for the victors. You and I, throughout our lives in the church, we've partaken in bread and wine, and the bread and the juice, probably quite often, haven't we? When we come together for communion. Christ instituted that, and Christians, we still observe that in the Lord's Supper. So there's a lot of puzzle pieces that are coming together here. And Abram gives a tenth or a tithe of what he's got. He gives that to Melchizedek in this particular case. The Israelites later on, we see when a tithe is instituted, it's given to the tribe of Levi, to the priest, for their service and for their livelihood. Again, along with war and along with Hebrew, it's the first time a tithe is mentioned in the Bible, here in Genesis chapter 14. Now, Melchizedek's mentioned in two other verses or passages in the Bible, Psalm 110 and Hebrews chapter 7. You see on the screen what they say to us. In Psalm 110, the Lord describes the Messiah as a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. And in Hebrews 7, it describes Melchizedek as being without a father, without a mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, he remains a priest perpetually. So who in the world is this unique individual who appears seemingly out of nowhere in Genesis chapter 14? Well, I'll tell you that the expert opinion, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure who he is. There is the belief, one interpretation, is that Melchizedek is what we call a Christophany, that this is an Old Testament appearance of Christ. Now, Jesus, as we know, entered the world as a human and entered the human race some 2,000 years ago. But the second member of the Trinity, the Son of God, has existed throughout eternity. And there are a lot of examples in the Old Testament. Anytime, I kind of lean toward just about every time in the Old Testament that it says an angel of the Lord appears, I kind of lean to that being Jesus, being Christ, being an Old Testament appearance of Christ. The word angel simply means messenger. It doesn't by itself mean a figure in white with wings. It means a messenger. And so I think most of the instances in the Old Testament of a messenger, an angel of the Lord, I think that might be an Old Testament appearance of Christ. I think when Balaam is on the way to curse the Israelites and his donkey sees the angel of the Lord, and starts talking, turns away, I think that was probably Jesus or the Son of God in the middle of the road. And what does he tell Balaam? He says, if your donkey hadn't turned out of the way, I was going to kill you. When Samson and Samson's parents, when they're told that they're going to have a child, what do they say that when they see the messenger of the Lord? We're going to die because we've seen God. I think they saw probably an Old Testament appearance of Christ. I think the burning bush is an Old Testament appearance of the Son of God. If you go read the text, it says that it was a messenger, an angel of the Lord that spoke to him through the bush. So I think that might be that. I kind of think everybody wants to say that Jesus is just all loving and good and doesn't want to hurt anybody. I'm kind of the opinion the death angel in the story of Exodus and the Passover, that might have been an appearance of the Son of God. I think most of the examples of an angel of the Lord in the Old Testament are probably the Son of God. It doesn't say here that this is a messenger of the Lord. It gives Melchizedek an actual name. So is this a Christophany? I don't know. The other view is simply that like Abram, like we looked at earlier, he's simply a type of Christ. That Melchizedek was a real person who lived at that time, and he's simply a picture. He's simply the expectation of the coming Christ in the New Testament. The passage in Hebrews where it says he doesn't have a father or a mother, he doesn't have any sort of genealogy, that's explained away by saying that it just means that Melchizedek did not come from wealth. He did not have a great name. He didn't come from a great family or anything. But the other theory is he was simply a real person. He was a real priest. He was a real king at this time. And he simply is an Old Testament type, or he's a foreshadowing of the coming Messiah. He's a picture of that, and Christ will follow within that style, within that line. Now, I want to say this as we conclude. Is it important that we know exactly who Melchizedek was? No, it doesn't divide us on anything in terms of Scripture. It shouldn't cause any issues, whatever side you want to come down on. I'll be honest with you. You catch me at a certain time, I may lean one way or the other as to whether this is Christ or this is just a type of Christ. I don't know. What's important, what I want to kind of close with before we look at our application is this. Abram is faced with two men. He's faced with the king of Sodom, and he's faced with Melchizedek. Now, we know how wicked the city of Sodom was, and we know what the Bible says about Melchizedek, about, if nothing else, that Christ is in that lineage. So if you're going to choose one of those two to follow, who's it going to be? It should be Melchizedek. And we see that Abram made the right choice. He wanted nothing to do with the sinful city of Sodom, with their king, and with what they offered. He wanted to follow, he wanted to be associated with the righteous individual. And so there's a wonderful example, a wonderful lesson for you and I tonight, that's who we follow. That when we face those choices, we make the right one. Now, Christians, as we draw to the end tonight, what application can we take? And I hope this chapter has been beneficial to you. This, for me, so far in Genesis, this has been the toughest chapter to kind of build into a sermon, into an outline. But what application can we take? I think three truths we can draw apart from the points we've already looked at. Every decision will have unexpected consequences. Christians, whatever we do, there will be consequences. So make sure the decisions that we make, we have God in mind. We do and try to follow what we think He would want us to do, and we're ready to deal with the consequences of whatever it is decisions that we make. I hate to use Scripture to make my second application, but it says it better than I could. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Again, what does Abram go out and do? In spite of all the mistakes his nephew had made, he goes out and he redeems him. He puts forth the effort to go and get him and to bring him back. That's a reminder, a lesson to us. As bad as we are, Jesus Christ redeemed us. That should also encourage us, the people we look at who aren't walking with the Lord. None of them are too far gone. We don't know their heart. We don't know what the Lord has in store for them. But no one's too far gone. No one's so unlovable that Jesus Christ can't redeem them. We were all in that state. And while we were yet sinners, He died for us. There are those out there today. There may be somebody in your life, you don't see any way they're ever going to come to the Lord. And you have no idea what He's going to do. We just have to wait and see how the Lord's going to work in their life. He may go out and redeem them. And then the final lesson from Abram's interaction with Melchizedek and the king of Sodom, our allegiance should always be with God and not with man. Now, is that always easy? No. Sometimes it's easy. It's easy to say. Is that always going to be the case? Probably not. But we should, in every case, in every circumstance, our allegiance should be with God and not with man. Whatever we know about Melchizedek, we can take that lesson tonight from Abram in the final passage that we looked at. Thank you for being with us tonight. I want to thank those who've joined us online. I appreciate them coming tonight. We'll let them depart now, and then here in a moment we'll have a word of prayer.